Good morning, everyone. My name is Carla Salp, and I am the Public Engagement Specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar, Japanese Beetle, What Homeowners Need to Know, which we are hosting in partnership with Washington State University Extension. We will have several presenters today, including Sven Spieschiger and Cassidy Chihorse from the Washington State Department of Agriculture Pest Program, Benita Matheson from WSDA's Nursery Program, and Gwen Hoheisel from Washington State University Extension. Feel free to ask questions as we go along using the Q&A function or the chat box. We may respond immediately there, or we may save your question to the end. Sven, please go ahead.
Okay, good morning, and thank you everybody for taking a little time out of your day. I believe Leah Doyle is diligently operating our PowerPoint here today. So Leah, if you would not mind advancing to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to be telling you a little bit about why we're here today and what we're talking about. And why we're here, of course, is because of the Japanese beetle. And I'm going to give you a little history of Japanese beetle in the United States and here in Washington State. So Japanese beetle is a scarab beetle, which is native to Japan, and it feeds on over 300 types of plants as an adult and does even more damage as a larvae. It was first found in the United States near Riverton, New Jersey, way back in 1916. And since that time, it has slowly spread and become established in about half of the country. You can see sort of here on the map up on the slide screen here, the areas in purple are areas that are considered to be generally infested. When you see green up on the slide, it means that people have actually looked for Japanese beetle and not found it. And occasionally you'll see yellow or brown like you do up here in Washington State. And that means we've detected one once in a while. Leah, next slide, please. Japanese beetle is actually a fairly effective hitchhiker. So obviously it arrived here way back in 1916, but it is very adept at catching a ride with a cargo airplane or a train car, different things like that, trucks. But that's as an adult. Most of the time, these things can die in transit, but far more than not, unfortunately, they do survive the flight over from the East Coast and end up jumping ship, so to speak, when they arrive at an airport or a train depot or a truck depot or things like that. Larvae can also spread, and that usually happens inside of the soil of potted plants, inside shipments of compost, landfill, so waste materials, things like that. And so it really is actually pretty good at moving around via man-assisted movement. Next slide, please. All right, so here in Washington State and in many of the Western states, we conduct annual Japanese beetle surveys, and this allows us to detect and eliminate populations before they become established. And Washington started its official surveys in the early 1990s, and that was mostly to support the passage of a state Japanese beetle quarantine, which I suspect Benita will talk about a little bit later in our presentation. As you can see, we target quite a few areas, and Leah, if you could go to the next slide. And these areas basically target the known pathways. So we have quite a few traps in and around the airports that get a lot of cargo in from the east and from other parts of the world. And we also have them, say, down in Clark County, which is adjacent to a known population that is being eradicated in the Portland, Oregon area. And so we always watch after these areas. If you take a look at the map here, you can see that over the years, Japanese beetle has actually been detected in Washington State, mostly in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, Spokane at the airport, and unfortunately, mostly this year in Yakima County. Most of these detections are associated with air cargo and usually do not result in Japanese beetle becoming established because the detection itself has eradicated the population as the trap has intercepted the lone beetle that hopped off a plane. Next slide, please. In 2020, Washington State Department of Agriculture's pest program basically deployed about 1,600 Japanese beetle traps throughout Washington. And outside of the usual detections we get near the cargo areas at the major airports in King County, unfortunately, we got a single beetle detected in Sunnyside in Yakima County. This is actually a little unusual. We don't spend a lot of time trapping down there because the pathway for them to get there really just isn't as good as it is in some of the other areas where we're deployed. But we take a detection like that very seriously. And our reaction to that was to deploy more traps in the area before the season was over. And as we were removing traps from the air, unfortunately, 2 additional specimens were found in a single trap in Grandview. And so this really did concern us quite a bit. Next slide. As a result of these detections, Washington State Department of Agriculture met, so that would be the pest program members from our plant inspection services and some of our higher ups, just to kind of get on the same page, see what we had actually found in 2020 and decide upon some additional action. Now, the general response to finding 2 insects in a trap is to do more intensive survey in the area the following season. And that is exactly what we plan to do. We had actually learned quite a bit from our experience with gypsy moth and with Asian giant hornet in the past year that outreach plays a very significant role, as do all of you. You know, there's a few of us, but all of you live there. You know what's supposed to be there. You recognize when things are out of place. And so in February of 2021, as part of the National Invasive Species Week, our communications department decided to target the Grandview area with just a simple post, which you see pictured here, asking anybody if they had seen anything like this to go ahead and report it. And this effort actually resulted in a report from Grandview, from a Grandview resident, that suggested a breeding population. Next slide. So the report we received detailed specimens seen in 2019, just a few, and then multiple specimens collected by this particular reportee in 2020. And she was kind enough to include some photographs, which really help us to basically heighten our efforts, because this generally suggests that we have a breeding population somewhere in the area. That's quite a few beetles for just one flower, and some of the details that were given to us have us very concerned that we definitely have an active population. And so what that tells us going into 2021 is that we need to continue to enhance our outreach and take advantage of kind citizens who take the time to report it and help us do our jobs. Provide training for residents to both recognize Japanese beetle and report it, and if they are able to control infestations on their own property, and our wonderful partners from Extension will be talking about that. And most importantly, we need to determine the extent of the current introduction. The policy here in Washington State is, first of all, to see how bad the problem is, gather that information, and then make an informed decision about what can be done about it. So next slide. With that, I'm going to pass off the baton to Cassie Chihorse with our pest program, and she's going to tell you about the biology of Japanese beetle and how to identify it. Cassie.
And
All right,
this is
thank you,
Carla.
Sid.
I'm going to pop in just one second. I noticed there's an error on our slides that says there's an email called beetles@agr.wa.gov. That actually does not exist. It's pestprogram@agr.wa.gov.
Leah, if you don't mind going back, thank you. So as Sven said, I'm going to talk about the life cycle of Japanese beetle and help you identify the larvae as well as the adult beetles. Helping understand their life cycle will help understand how Japanese beetle impacts and can help potentially damage your lawns, your foliage, and have impacts in Washington State. And then at the very end, I'm going to kind of lead into how to identify the adult beetle, how to identify the grub, and then identify some common imposters or other insects, beetles you might see out around at the same time the adults are out. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of start off into like kind of the springtime. As we're moving forward, temperatures are getting warmer. Things are beginning to start to blossom and sprout. Grass is becoming more green. Kind of that springtime. At that same time, grubs below the soil are starting to wake up from the winter. And when they wake up, they're really hungry. So this larvae is hungry and it's going to start eating. It'll stay under the ground and it'll start feasting on roots of grass mainly, but it'll also feed on roots of ornamental trees, shrubs, other garden plants, and it'll feast and feast. As it becomes closer to the summer, those larvae will actually turn into pupae, which will then actually turn into the adult beetles. So now we're into the summertime, right? And that pupae is turned into the adult beetle, and the adult beetle will actually emerge from underground. It'll go above ground and it'll start to feast on foliage above ground, including leaves and flowers. As it's feasting, it'll kind of skeletonize and defoliate all these leaves and flowers. While it's doing that, it'll also mate and then begin to return to the soil and lay eggs. After it's laid some eggs, it's going to go back up and eat some more and repeat that process throughout the summer. So it's not only eating, but it's also laying more eggs that are going to turn into larvae. So as we move into the fall, those eggs that were laid, the adult beetles will pass on, but those eggs will turn into new larvae. And as we know, larvae is hungry, so it's going to start eating the grass roots again. And then winter will hit and this cycle will continue on. Leah, next slide, please. So these larvae, they're kind of this white C-shaped grub. Oops. They have a typical brown tan head, and you can see in the picture it does have visible legs. They'll be typically anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1 inch long, and they're seen in the spring. But remember, these larvae live under the ground. Another thing I just kind of want to mention about the larvae or this grub is that it's really hard to distinguish it from other grubs unless you're able to examine the pattern of the spines and the hairs on the underside of it, and including the hairs on the tip of that abdomen. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a bigger overview of the life cycle. I just wanted to point out and show you how much of the time that those grubs and the larvae spend underground compared to the time of that adult beetle. It's about 10 months, but we're going to kind of switch over and now think about that adult beetle and that time it spends above ground. And even though that adult beetle's life cycle is pretty short, it can cover a lot of ground. Even if you succeed in controlling your Japanese beetle population, that doesn't mean that your neighbors might come on over. Next slide. So how can we identify these adult beetles? Well, here's a picture of it. So they're usually about 1/3 to 1/2 inch long. They're pretty metallic-y green in color. You'll see that on their head and their thorax. And if you look at those wing covers, they tend to be more copper in color. And if you look at the sides and kind of the very end of it, you'll see white fuzzy patches sticking out, and those are actually hairs. And on the sides of its abdomen, on each side, there's 5 patches, and then there's 2 on the tip. And remember that these adult beetles, they're seen in the summertime, and they'll be seen above ground. Next slide. So as you're seeing some of these adult beetles out and about, you might be seeing other beetles and insects as well. I'm just going to go over a couple kind of common imposters, things you can look at, things you can be looking for if you think you might see an adult Japanese beetle. So this first one on the left here is a blue milkweed beetle. You'll kind of see them out through the months of May and September, hence their name blue milkweed. They like to eat milkweed, and they're actually their host plant for the larvae too. They're kind of found in the western United States. They're usually under 1/2 inch. They're that bright metallic blue color, and they're kind of oval shaped. So we're going to flip over to the right side, flower shaper. Since it has the word flower in it, you're going to find it around flowers. It's typically brick colored to that light brown color, oval in shape, about 1/2 inch long, and just a background on flower shaper. They were originally discovered in 2001 in British Columbia, about 15 miles from the Washington border. Next slide. So the one I have on the left here is a green rose shaper. They're typically metallic-y green in color, but they also can sometimes have more of a bronze, copper, violet, blue, gray, or black to them with that metallic-y sheen. And if you can kind of see on those wing colors, you see some kind of notches or striping. It kind of has some creamy white streaks on those wing cases. They're typically about 3/4 of an inch long If you're able to see the underside, it's typically a coppery color. And because it's a green rose Schaefer, obviously they like roses, but they'll also feast on other flowers, and they'll feed throughout the summer and into the fall. On the right side here for you, I have a little bear beetle. They're found a lot throughout the Great Basin in the United States, but they're also found on the east of the Cascades here. They're named for their little bear beetles are named for that woolly fuzz you see on them as they're adults. They'll tend to emerge in the spring, and it's been known for them to target sagebrush. But adults, they'll also feed on blossoms, buds, and leaves of various trees and shrubs, including apple blossoms and peach tree leaves. They're typically about a third of an inch to 3/4 of an inch big. Next slide. The last two I have for you here are blister beetle and Klamath weed beetles. The blister beetles anywhere from 1/4 to a little bit over 1/2 inch long. You might be able to see them out a little bit earlier in the spring. They're found throughout North America. They tend to be green to blue to black in color. The weed beetle, the adults are oblong in shape. They're typically about 1/4 of an inch long. You notice the head kind of always points downward. They're a metallic-y, shiny color, colored blue, bronze, green, or purple. And they were actually initially introduced into California to control the Klamath weed, hence their name. So those are some of the insects that you might typically see or we have had reported to us in the past. With that being said, we're going to go to the next slide. And you might say, got grubs. Sometimes you might not always be able to see the Japanese beetle because much of its life cycle it spends under the ground, but you might be able to see the effects of Japanese beetle. So you can see the picture on the left, that's the lawn damage. With the picture on the right, you see the skeletonization or the defoliage of that leaf. You might see that on a leaf, but maybe you don't see the Japanese beetles. Well, take a look under the plant, maybe see if they fell to the ground. Sometimes if that leaf or the plant is disturbed, the Japanese beetles can fall. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton off to our next speaker, who's going to talk about these impacts Japanese beetles have a little bit more.
Go ahead and unmute yourself, Benita, and you're up next, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. What I want to talk about a little bit today is just kind of the impacts that would affect Washington State if Japanese beetle were to become established here. And what it would affect is not only homeowner gardens, turf grass, but it would also affect our local farms and also our grape industry, our hops industry, and it would affect the quarantines that we have within our state and outside, and also our exports that we send out to other countries. Next slide, please. So for the homeowners, you would really see the impact here because all of your ornamental shrubs and trees would be affected by Japanese beetle. You know, your garden can take a little bit of feeding, but if you have young or unhealthy plants, they will become stunted, injured, or killed, you know, from severe persistent feeding, which Japanese beetle is, you know, you're not going to see just one Japanese beetle on your plants. And so they do love roses. And so even though they can survive the feeding, the blossoms are often ruined by these insects. Next slide, please. And so this is just to show you some of the primary and secondary woody plants that are susceptible to adult Japanese beetle feeding. And as you can see, one of their primary hosts is apple, and also plum, apricot, cherry, peach. And, you know, within Yakima County, we have about 58,000 acres of apples. And so this would really affect the apple industry and also any other fruit tree industries within this area if Japanese beetle were to become a little bit more established. And you can also see the secondary list there has a couple of ornamentals that you might have in your in your lawn. Next slide. So here's a list of some of the herbaceous plants that would be susceptible to Japanese beetle feeding. And as you can see, a lot of these are just ornamentals, but we also have sunflower, soybean, raspberry, sweet corn, and also grapes, which is a big industry in the Yakima area, and also roses. And so this is not a an exclusive list. Japanese beetles do feed on over 300 species of plants. And so they basically, if they're hungry enough, they're going to eat it. And so this, a lot of these plant crops are the basis of our specialty crop exports. Next slide. This would also have an impact on turf grass, and we do have a big turf industry over in Eastern Washington. And if you see on the left-hand side, the early signs of Japanese beetle damage to turf, it really just looks like maybe you haven't watered enough, but if you were to roll that back, you'd probably see the larvae and the feeding that they are doing. On the right side, you see the severe Japanese beetle damage to the turf, which basically ruins the turf, and it is expensive to maintain. Next slide. So again, as far as damage to our farms and our nurseries, our local nurseries, it would be a very big impact. As you can see, they will feed on anything. And even though these fruits and vegetables can tolerate that limited leaf feeding, that severe damage is going to affect the plant growth and reduce the yield of our crops in the area. Next slide. Just to give you kind of a little information about the exports that we have in the area. Yakima currently has 3,000, about a little over 3,000 farms. In our neighboring counties, we have just about the same. And our top commodities do include apple, potatoes, cherries, and hops, which are all primary hosts of Japanese beetle. Next slide. And then at this time, Washington is a Category 1 state, which means that we do not have restrictions on shipping because of Japanese beetle. If that were to change, it would be harder for our farmers and nurseries to ship plants and other ag products around the country and to foreign countries. So with that, I think that's all I've got.
Thanks, Benita. I think Cassie's going to give us a little rundown on how you can stay informed about what we're doing at WSDA.
Awesome. So now that we know about the Japanese beetle and their life cycle, when we're going to see them and all the harm it can cause, as well as what the program's done in the past, it's really important for you as citizens to know what you can do now to help prevent this pest from establishing and to protect your lawns, your gardens, as well as a lot of commodities we have in the state. So the best thing to do, whether you think you've seen a Japanese beetle or you're not sure if it is or not, is to report Japanese beetle. Right now, we're really trying to find the extent of the population and how many beetles there are and where they are. So the best thing you can do is report it. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can go to our website, agr.wa.gov/beetles. We have a reporting page on there. So basically you just click on the map, drop a pin for where you thought that beetle was, and you can fill out information saying when you saw it, where you saw it, any details, and you also have the chance to upload a photo. It's really important for us to be able to see photos if you have one, because that helps us confirm or deny if it's Japanese beetle, as well as see if it's just one beetle or if there's multiple beetles. You can also send an email to the pest program, and it's pestprogram@agr.wa.gov. You can see that email throughout our PowerPoint at the bottom of the slides. Another way you can do it is call our hotline, 1-800-443-6664. So remember, right now it's springtime, those grubs are in the ground, but as the Japanese beetle gets ready to emerge and summer becomes nearer and you're going to see them out and about, go ahead and if you think you've seen them, report them. Also, if you happen to have pictures and evidence of Japanese beetle from last year, we will more than be happy to take those reports in. It helps us determine the extent of our population we potentially have now. So if you have reports from 2020, go ahead and report them to us via our website, email, or give us a phone call. Also, another thing to do is be prepared for us to potentially offer a citizen scientist trapping program in the near future to give you tips and hints on different ways you can help us survey for Japanese beetle and become a citizen scientist. Next slide. The last couple things are just to keep you informed on Japanese beetle. Lee, if you click it once more, it might have a, never mind. Sorry, back. There's a couple things you can do. If you go to our website, again, I'll mention it, agr.wa.gov/beetles, there's a link to our Facebook group and a link to sign up for email alerts. We'll eventually start to send out stakeholder updates, which will give you updates on where we are with the program, what we're doing, and anything going on with the Japanese beetle world. You can also get those through our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But more specifically on Facebook, we have a Japanese beetle watch group. And you can join that group to keep up with others on what's going on in the Japanese beetle world and also receive updates from the WSDA through that platform. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Washington State University Extension to talk to you a little bit more.
Thank you. So I'm Gwen Haweisel. I'm with WSU, and next slide, please. So just before we decide to treat or put any chemical application, I really wanted to reinforce that we don't do this prophylactically. We don't know that this pest is everywhere. And so that's what Department of Ag is trying, as they said, to determine. So for you, the first step is to detect, then to identify, report it, as Cassie just told you, and then I will give you options for treatment. So it's important that we don't just treat without proper identification. Okay, next slide. Okay, so one way to do detection is your local home and garden shops. We've been in contact with them, and they will start carrying some of them will start carrying Japanese beetle pheromone traps. These are little traps you can hang up, put in your backyard, and it has a pheromone that will bring in the Japanese beetle, and they'll go in the bag and they'll die. It's an easy way too, that they're all in one spot. When you need to take a picture, that's a good way to do it. If you're a little squeamish about insects and you want to make sure there's none that might come out or squeak at you for any reason, you can also take this trap and put it in the freezer and kill all the insects and then take your picture. So, and these traps should last you in general most of the summer. The traps are specific for adults. So Cassie told you that right now you have grubs. In the next couple months, you would want to put this trap out when the adults emerge, and that's what you would see. It's easier for you to be able to identify those, and this is a quick way. So next slide. Okay. So in the Grandview, Yakima, Tri-Cities area where Sven talked about there being more beetles right now or more captures, there is a tendency to put a lot of fescue in the lawn, which turns brown. And so what I really don't want people to do is think, oh gosh, if you drive along, look at all the brown spots in the lawn right now. And when irrigation hasn't been turned on yet, and you think, well, I wonder if that's all Japanese beetle. It very likely isn't. It's very likely grass species. So after watering begins, if you see brown spots in your lawn, you can take a shovel and just take the back layer or the top layer of lawn and peel it back. If it's a bad infestation, sometimes the roots are already loose or have already been eaten by the grubs, and so it comes up fairly easy. But if you flip it back and you see C-shaped larvae, as Cassie talked about, then that's an indication. If you can do it, scoop them up with a shovel, put them into a container, and report it to Department of Ag. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so identification, Cassie covered, so I'm not going to go over this in big detail, but I just need to remind you that this step is first to detect it and then to make sure you get the proper identification. So we're all here to help, and we don't want to treat for some of those lookalikes that Cassie talked about. So we want to make sure that it has the characteristics and is confirmed as Japanese beetle before you apply a chemical treatment. Okay, next slide. Okay, so if you didn't get their numbers before, here's your chance. Write it down. So this is how you're going to report them and then also get your identification. So next slide. Okay, so treatment is a little interesting, a little tricky in this, because really what you want to do is target the life stage, you know, so a specific chemical is going to target a specific life stage. And so you have to know that if you're treating from whether or not you want to treat big grubs, which are in this early springtime right now, or if you want to treat the eggs and little grubs, which is really in that time period of applying a treatment in July and August, or if you're treating the adults. And grubs, sorry, grubs, you're applying a chemical treatment to the lawn. Adults, you're applying something to the actual plant above ground. Okay, that's your target. You don't get good control for any adults that are in the soil, even though there's a little picture of them coming up and down. That's not where we target adults. Okay, so next slide. All right, so there is a handout that's going to be on the it is on the Benton Franklin Extension website that has all these pictures, all these recommendations. So you can go to the, just Google Benton Franklin County Extension, and you can go to our Master Gardener Japanese beetle site, and it has all of this wording so that you don't have to memorize it right now. So if the goal is eradication, then we do need to treat with some products. And there's a lot of, if you Google Japanese beetle, there's a lot of products that are out there, and some of them are great if we're going to practice, say, Japanese beetle is here to stay and how we're going to manage it and suppress its population. But we don't want Japanese beetle to be here to stay, which is exactly what Benita said, that it will cause a lot of problems for industries and homeowners and so forth. So the recommendations that are on that page are the ones that are most effective. And the ones that we should be able to get the best control out of so that we can all work together and eliminate this pest. So with that being said, what I tried to do was help you with timings, basic timings, to know whether or not you're going to treat the big grubs, which that would be if you were going to apply something. So say you saw issues in your lawn and you pulled it back. So from May to mid-July, what you're going to do is you're going to apply a preventative insecticide. So it's trying to prevent the once a Japanese beetle comes back in the soil and lays its eggs, it's trying to prevent the eggs and little grubs. So the whole point of applying from May to mid-July is that the insecticide is there, and as the Japanese beetle comes back in to lay its eggs in the soil, it kills those eggs. If you already have big grubs, then you would apply those in any of the other months. So basically, if you get into September, October, November, or say you look right now, you go out into your lawn and you see them right now, you apply something that's a curative insecticide, and it will be on a blue table on the next screen, and that will actually be a contact insecticide that kills the big grubs. Adults, we're treating the plant, the rose, the bush, the tree. That is a different insecticide, and we're applying it to the plant, not the lawn. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I can't talk about insecticides unless I tell you, some of these cautionary notes. If you go to a home and garden store and there's a whole shelf of chemicals that are out there. On the back of any product, you can usually peel up the little plastic tab and you can read the label. It's really critical. On that label, what you want to read is if Japanese beetle is on the label, and very often it'll say if it's controlling the adult or grub, or it'll say larva instead of grub. But there are some key things to look at on the label. How to use it, how much to use, and for best results, right? So just please follow those instructions. They also will usually say to you, you should wear something, protective equipment. So you should always apply insecticides with full pants, shoes, full shirt, long sleeve shirt. Just look at the labels and make sure that you're not out there in your flip-flops putting this on, right? So please read how to use it, how much for best results, what you should wear, and make sure you read that it says Japanese beetle on the label. Okay, so this table that's in gray down below is something I put up because I want you all to be aware of some of the chemicals and when it's best to apply them and help you with it. So if you see a little bee with an X, that means that there's going to be a note in there that I put for you that says, don't apply this when the bees are present, which means if you're applying it in your lawn, you're going to mow your lawn. If you use a little with the bee symbol with no hashtag or cross through it, it's safe for bees. There's one product that you should not apply on plants that are going to attract butterflies. And then I also listed for some of you, if you wanted an organic option, I listed it out what the organic option would be. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's the deal. There are probably 35 to 40 products that are going to all be labeled something different. And they all have a different name. 3-in-1 insect disease killer, 4-in-1 rose mite control. They all have different names. The real key ingredient here is to look at the active ingredient. And we often do this in other things in life. If you think about Advil versus ibuprofen, Advil is the brand name. The actual ingredient in that is ibuprofen, but you can get Safeway brand ibuprofen, Advil ibuprofen. You can get all different kinds of brand names. So what I want you to do is look at the label, and you're going to look for the active ingredient on that product that you're going to buy. And then you're going to look at this chart and say, is it on there? And is this effective for that time period? So, for example, for an adult, you have a couple examples where it's all-in-one roses and flower concentrate, vegetable and garden, insect spray, 3-in-1 disease control. Those are all going to be brand names, but they have different active ingredients, which are the ones at the bottom. So imidacloprid, spinosad, etc. There is another, if you wanted an organic option, you have the choice of the beetle juice, which is a type of biological product. And that one is the one product that has the don't apply on plants for butterflies are going to come to them. Okay, next product or page slide. Okay, so where do you find it? So on the label, there's going to be all the nice pictures and advertisements that are on there. And then on the front of it, usually at the bottom in the corner in smaller print, there is something that's always bold that says active ingredient. And it might have more than one name in there. And this is a good example because this is a rose and flower all in one product, right? So it's an insect and disease product. So this one has an active ingredient of the tebuconazole, the TEB up there at the top, and then it also says imidacloprid. Look at those names, match it with the active ingredient in the chart. Imidacloprid is on both. The other one is the all-in-one. It's a fungicide. It's okay that it's there. It doesn't have to be the only product that's there. You just need to match them up to make sure they're both with that one of those products, imidacloprid, is also on the product to treat the adults. Okay, so next slide. All right, so if you are applying from May to mid-July, which is what we're coming up on now, we really want to be, if you realized or thought you had a population of grubs. So you're digging under the ground, you see the grubs, you get it identified by Department of Ag, and then you say, okay, I need to treat. You're going to apply these products to the lawn from May to mid-July. And when the adult comes back down to lay its eggs, it will treat and kill those eggs. The one cautionary note I have in this is, or two actually, is that very often products on this one will say season-long control. So that kind of gives you a hint because it's supposed to be a preventative for the next season and has a long lifespan in your lawn. The other thing is before you apply this, mow your lawn before applying, and then make sure that you're ready to apply it and water it in. You follow all the labels will say it, but don't just apply it and leave it. Apply it and then water your lawn. Okay, next slide. All right, so say the summer goes by, you didn't have any problem in the spring, you saw some adults, you treated them, but then, or maybe you weren't paying attention, but then you start to see in the fall some dark spots in the lawn, and you pull them up, you again get them identified, and now you need to know what to do. So those are when you're going to apply a curative. The key words that are often on labels is quick, 24-hour control. It's because that it's a contact, it's going to have a short life in your soil. It really does attack that insect right then and there, and it's a big insect. So in general, you will again apply these from September to May, and you want to mow your lawn first. There is the one product, Grub Halt, which has one of your organic products. I put a special note there that you really would like to apply it from mid-July to August, and I put that note just because of what was on the product label and some other research results. So just be aware that if you choose that product, that's the one product you want to get on the ground a little bit early. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just remember, find it, identify it, report it, and then treat it. We are not recommending that everybody go out and prophylactically treat your lawns for Japanese beetle. We want to be able to identify it first. Okay, next one. I think that's it. Yep. So these are just some resources that are going to be there. The Benton Franklin Master Gardeners and the Yakima County Master Gardeners are here to help answer questions. But also I told you there would be a homeowner control option for as a handout. So all of this information, you can go to our Benton Franklin County website and find that. And then USDA, if you also Google Japanese Beetle Homeowner Handbook, USDA APHIS has a great resource that you can keep reading up on some more information if you wanted to become a very well-versed citizen scientist. Next slide. Good.
Thanks so much, everyone. Leah, if you could go back to that last slide, I think that'll be great to leave that slide up so that people have those resources as we answer some questions that were asked here in the chat. There was a question, what about other grubs in the soil that aren't Japanese beetle? Is there a risk to non-target species? I don't know if, Gwen, do you want to take that one?
I'm really sorry. Can you repeat the question? I was trying
Sure,
to
no problem.
because you said they were in there and I was trying to get to where the questions were. So sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, technology is definitely an issue, and we've got a lot of different boxes open between the Q&A and the chat and the participants. So, so Tara asked, what about all the other grubs in the soil that aren't Japanese beetle? Is there a risk to non-target species?
Yes, there can be a risk to non-target species. That's one of the reasons why you're only going to apply this in certain areas. But to be honest, some of the other beetle grubs that are in there, like a lot of ground beetle grubs, which are beneficial insect beetles, they are not often laying their eggs in your lawn. So you avoid some of the contact with other beneficial beetles just because you're treating your lawn. We're not asking you or recommending you to treat every garden aspect. Right now, focus on the lawn because it's a preferred host for them.
Thanks, Gwen. And there was another question. I don't know if Sven or who wants to take this one, but there was a question about whether there are any native predators for Japanese beetles.
Absolutely. There are, of course, a number of things that are native and also non-native. I grew up in the East. My mornings consisted of going out to my mother's rose hedge, filling a coffee can full of Japanese beetles and feeding them to the chickens as a protein source for the chickens. And this is very simple control activity as well that everybody can do. Can of water. If you want them to drown faster, you can put a drop of dish soap on the top and just knock the adults down in there and drown them. But most birds will prey on beetles if they can get them. Certainly mice and shrews will take advantage of them as a meal. So there are a number of things, but for this ever being a solution, as is the case with most pests that get out of control and become problematic to our way of life, whatever is out there obviously is not keeping them in check in the East, and it's not going to be a permanent solution. But it's basically we're adding another food source to the food chain, but it's one that we really don't want here if we can avoid it. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Sven. There was a question about whether WSDA or WSC will be doing a presentation for fruit growers. Yes, we actually have in the works an industry-centric Japanese beetle presentation currently planned for April 19th, I believe. I think it's going to be at 10 a.m. We haven't advertised that yet, but it is in the works. There will be one specifically targeted to industry, so stay tuned for that. And I'm looking through the questions here, but if I did not get your question, or Leah, if you saw one that I missed, please go ahead and pipe in and I will make sure we get your question answered. Or if for some reason we miss it, please don't hesitate to contact us at the email, the phone number on the webpage right there. Scanning through just to make sure we didn't
Leah,
miss
there were some
anything.
messages that I sent you in the chat that I
I
received.
will, yeah, I will respond to Mike directly.
There were a few before that. I'm not sure if you saw those.
Okay, hold on one moment, please. I had to like copy it into a different document because it was getting too out of control. Oh yes, there was a question, excuse me. And I think this was for Benita when she was talking about the different susceptible plants, but Holly asked, by susceptible, does that mean a favored food source or more easily damaged by general feeding?
So those are just the primary plants that they like, but as I said, those they'll eat anything. There's over 300 different types of plants and plant material that they'll eat, and those are just what they prefer. But if there is not another food source, they will eat anything that is there.
Thanks so much, Benita. And there was a question that I answered in the Q&A about what to do if you're from Oregon. And Oregon does have an active infestation that they have been treating for a few years, sort of outside the Portland area. I put the link to the website, but generally speaking, you can contact the Oregon Department of Agriculture about questions about Japanese beetle in Oregon, or the Oregon Invasive Species Council. I believe they have one there as well. And let me just scan through here. There's a question about whether we're asking homeowners to bring grubs into master gardener clinics. Go ahead and take a photo of what you think you have and report it first from WSDA, and then we will give you directions from there on if we need to get it to somebody for further identification. Okay, there's a question from Haley. Maybe somebody understands it a little bit more than I do, but it says there have been some issues with hormone traps in affected areas. Are you concerned that it might end up creating quote unquote hot spots? Maybe Sven?
Yeah, I can certainly address that. In my time in Pennsylvania, we would often get calls about the pheromone traps because believe it or not, folks, these things get so out of control that you can fill up the bag of a Japanese beetle trap overnight during the heat of the season in an outbreak year. And back east, every 5 years or so, these things get a little bit unbearable for the average homeowner. So just another reason we don't want them here. But the theory is that if you have a pheromone trap and you're not really good at tending your trap and it overflows, then you are just attracting them to your property. But that is a very different situation from what we have going on here. Back east, they're literally using them as a form of control. Not a form of detection. Here we would be asking you to use them as a form of detecting whether or not they're on your property. It is all of our fondest hope that no Japanese beetle trap in Washington State will ever have the bag completely fill up. We're definitely hoping we're not at that point yet, but that's really where some of those concerns come from back east, is that really they are so overwhelming in some cases that the traps get full up and then you're just attracting them to your property and they cease to provide the control that you were intending. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks. And Melody, our very famous Melody, who initially gave the report on March 1st, I was asking what time of year should we look under suspected lawn areas? Not sure if Gwen or Sven wants to take that.
I can answer, Melody. So Melody, in Eastern Washington, and I don't know if we have people from Western Washington, but in Eastern Washington, our lawns often dry out right now. And so there can be a lot of brown spots. So after you start irrigating and you know you're not just digging up everything in your lawn, which is, to me, you know, could ruin someone's lawn because you're going to pull up the roots. So if you saw adults, you can start looking under brown patches in your lawn as, you know, early as April, May, that kind of stuff. Getting in there in February and March when we haven't irrigated the lawn could lead to just digging up patches right now that we're not sure of. And I don't want to tell you to ruin your lawn with that. So just make sure you water first. You give the grass the time to kind of go from brown to green and wake up. And then if you have brown patches, go look. So, and that time of month is April, May-ish to keep looking. And then in the fall, you can look again and look for, you know, late summer and fall, start looking again, because that's when they would have come up and laid their eggs and come back underground and eaten roots again under that time period. If you actually look at that very nice diagram on someone drew it from USDA on the months that in the life cycle of the beetle, it walks you through exactly what's happening and where the grubs will be.
Thanks, Gwen. And somebody was having trouble. I did put the link to the Benton Franklin Extension website. Some people were having trouble finding the document, so I pulled the actual link to the document and I just put that in the chat for anyone who's interested. We'll also add the link to that document on our agr.wa.gov/beetles webpage as well, so that you can access it there. That'll probably be up before the end of the day. All right, Leah, help me out. Am I missing any other questions?
Will this presentation be available there as well?
Yes, it will be available there. We are currently live streaming it on YouTube, so it's also available on YouTube now, but it'll probably be up on our website later today. All right, I think that we're getting very close to the end of our hour. If you do have any other questions, suggestions for this presentation, this was the first time doing it, so we do appreciate your feedback and your participation. Thank you for helping spread the word about Japanese beetle. And once again, from WSDA, for us, especially this year, the most important thing is going to be report, report, report every time you see Japanese beetle. And just to reiterate one last time, you can report at agr.wa.gov/beetles using the pest program email at pestprogram@agr.wa.gov or by calling our hotline at 1-800-443-6684. You can also use any of those methods to contact us if you have any additional questions about today's presentation. Thank you so much.